Arizona Territory, 1873. Dust clung to everything: clothes, skin, hope. Sarah Emerson stood trembling at the auction block, her 3 hungry children huddled behind her skirts. When the blind Apache man was brought forward, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Nobody wanted him. Worthless, they said. But Sarah saw something in his weathered-faced dignity, perhaps. Or was it wisdom? With her last 3 silver dollars, she made her bid. The auctioneer's laugh cut through the air like a knife. Sold. To the widow with more heart than sense. As she led him away by a frayed rope, townsfolk shook their heads. What could a starving woman possibly want with a blind Indian? Could this desperate act be the very thing that would save not just her family, but an entire way of life? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Emerson's calloused fingers traced the inside of the empty flour barrel, searching for remnants that weren't there. 8 months since Thomas had been laid in the ground, victim to a typhoid outbreak that had spared her and the children, but left them alone on this unforgiving patch of Arizona Territory. 8 months of watching their stores dwindle, their hopes wither like the crops in the parched earth. Mama? Emma, just 4 years old, tugged at her skirt. I'm hungry. Sarah forced a smile. I know, sweet pea. We'll have something soon. The lie tasted bitter in her mouth. The larder held nothing but a handful of dried beans and half a potato. Not enough for 3 growing children. James, her middle child at 7, sat quietly by the window, whittling a stick into nothing particular. He'd stopped asking about food 3 days ago. That worried her more than Emma's constant questions. William, her eldest at 11, had taken to his father's responsibilities with a determination that broke Sarah's heart. Too young for such burdens, but necessity didn't honor childhood. He was out now, checking the trap lines that had been empty for weeks. The cabin Thomas had built felt more like a tomb than a home now. Sarah had sold nearly everything of value: her mother's silver hairbrush, Thomas's pocket watch, the good china they'd carefully transported from Missouri. All gone, traded for flour and salt and coffee that had long since been consumed. Outside, the wind kicked up dust devils in the yard. 6 acres planted, 6 acres failing. The well was running low, forcing them to ration water. Their milk cow had dried up weeks ago, and they'd been forced to slaughter their only pig back in May. We're not meant for this land, Mrs. Peterson had told her just yesterday at the general store where Sarah had gone to sell her wedding ring. A woman alone can't manage out here. You should take the children back east to your people. But there were no people to go back to. Her parents were dead, her brothers scattered to the winds. This homestead failing as it was represented. Everything they had, the storekeeper had given her $3 for the gold band. It's charity more than fair price, he'd said, not unkindly. Ain't nobody buying luxuries these days. Sarah had swallowed her pride and accepted the coins. She'd intended to buy flour, but then she'd heard about the auction. Government surplus and seized goods, they said. Maybe there would be food going cheap, or tools they could use. William came through the door, his face drawn. Nothing in the traps again, Ma. Sarah nodded, having expected nothing else. Get cleaned up. We're going to town. What for? His eyes, too old for his face, searched hers. There's an auction. Maybe we'll find something we need. With what money? It wasn't disrespect in his tone, just the practicality they'd all been forced to learn. Sarah patted her pocket where the 3 coins lay heavy. I sold my ring. William's eyes widened slightly, then his jaw set in a firm line. Pa would understand. The 12-mile journey to Tucson had been brutal under the August sun. Emma rode on the mule while Sarah, William, and James walked alongside. They arrived dusty and parched, Joining the crowd gathered at the courthouse square, where the auction was already underway, Sarah watched with dismay as food items, canned goods, flour sacks, even a barrel of salt pork sold for prices far beyond her means. The crowd was desperate, and desperation drove prices up, not down. "Final lot," the auctioneer called as the sun began its descent. One Apache male, approximately 30 years of age, blind but healthy enough for labor. A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd as two soldiers led forward a man with his hands bound before him. He wore canvas trousers and a threadbare shirt that had once been military issue. His black hair hung in two braids, and across his eyes was a thin white scar that explained his blindness. "Captured during the last campaign," the auctioneer explained. "Government's authorized sale to defray expenses of the territory. He'll need feeding, but he can work. Starting bid at $5. The crowd remained silent. No one wanted the burden of an Indian, especially a blind one. $3, the auctioneer said, his voice betraying irritation. "Surely someone needs an extra pair of hands? He can chop wood, haul water." Still no one spoke. Sarah felt this. Coins in her pocket. $3 all they had in the world. "Ma, no," William whispered, sensing her thoughts. "What use is a blind Indian?" Someone called from the crowd. The auctioneer's face reddened. "Look here, I've got orders to dispose. Of all items, I can't take him back to the fort. $2? Anyone?" Sarah stepped forward, her heart hammering. "I'll give $3. The laugh that followed her bid stung worse than the sun. Heads turned, whispers circulated. The widow Emerson, buying herself an Indian with her last coins instead of food for her. Children. $3 from Mrs. Emerson, the auctioneer said, relief and amusement mingling in his voice. Going once, going twice. Sold to the widow with more heart than sense. As Sarah approached to claim her purchase, she caught sight of the Apache's face. Despite his bound hands and the indignity of his position, he held himself with a quiet dignity that stirred something in her. Then, though his eyes saw nothing, his head turned slightly toward her, as if sensing her approach. What had she done? $3 enough for flour to last a month spent on a blind man who would be. One more mouth to feed. Yet as she was handed the rope that bound his wrists, Sarah couldn't help but feel she'd made the only choice possible. Nako felt the woman's hesitation through the rope in her hands. Her footsteps were light but determined, accompanied by the shuffling of children. 3, he counted, from the pattern of their movements. One very small, barely more than a toddler. The oldest walked with the deliberate heaviness of a boy trying to be a man. 3 years since, the raid that had taken his sight, and still Nako listened to the world with the keen attention of a scout. The cavalry had attacked at dawn. There. Village near the Dragoon Mountains still sleeping. The flash of the rifle had been the last thing he'd ever seen, a blinding burst that had burned away his vision but left him alive. A cruel mercy. They'd taken him prisoner rather than killing him outright. An error in judgment his people would never have made. A blind warrior was useless. Or so they believed. "We're taking the wagon road out of town," the woman said, her voice low, meant only for him. "It's 12 miles to our homestead. Can you walk it?" Nako inclined his head slightly. 12 miles was nothing. Before his capture, he'd run 50 miles in a day to deliver messages between Apache bands. "Do you understand English?" she asked again. He nodded. 3 years among the whites had taught him their language, though he spoke it rarely. Words were precious things, not to be wasted on those who didn't listen. "Ma, this is crazy," the oldest boy hissed. "What are we going to do with him? We can barely feed ourselves." "William, that's enough," the woman his new owner said firmly. "Your father always said every mouth comes with a pair of hands. He'll earn his keep." Nako suppressed a smile. So that was her reasoning. She thought a blind man could somehow salvage her failing homestead. He'd heard the desperation in her bid, smelled the hunger on her children. She was drowning and had grabbed at him like a floating branch, not realizing he was just as adrift. Walked in silence for the first mile until they reached the outskirts of the white settlement. Then the woman stopped and did something unexpected. She untied his hands. "My name is Sarah Emerson," she said. "These are my children William, James, and Emma." Nako rubbed his wrists, feeling the raw skin where the ropes had chafed. He considered whether to speak. This woman had bought him, but she'd also freed his hands, a risk few whites would take with an Apache, blind or not. "Nako," he said finally, his voice rough from disuse. "Is that your name?" The youngest child, Emma, asked, with undisguised curiosity. He nodded. "What does it mean?" she persisted. "It means warrior," he answered, the English words feeling clumsy on his tongue. "You don't look like much of a warrior now," the older boy William muttered. "William!" Sarah scolded, but Nako shook his head. "The boy speaks truth," he said. "A blind warrior is like a wingless eagle. Yet eagles that lose their wings still have talons," Sarah observed quietly. The comment surprised him. Perhaps this white woman was not entirely foolish. As they continued their journey, Nako discreetly felt inside his shirt, confirming his medicine bundle remained hidden there. The soldiers had taken his weapons, his horse, even his moccasins, but they'd overlooked the small leather pouch tied around his neck beneath his clothing. Within it lay a single eagle feather, a piece of lightning-struck wood, and a small quartz crystal objects of power his grandfather had given him when he'd become a scout. The bundle had no magic to restore his sight, but it connected him to his people, to the spirits of earth and sky. While he possessed it, he was not entirely lost. The sun beat down mercilessly as they traveled. Nako could feel its position on his skin, one of the many ways he'd learned to navigate his darkened world. The land here was familiar. He'd scouted these territories for years before his capture. They were heading east from the settlement, into the foothills where water was scarce, but the soil less alkaline. "Emma can ride the mule," Sarah said after they'd walked several more miles. "I'm afraid the rest of us must walk." "I not tired," Nako said, deliberately simplifying his speech. Let them think him simple. The less they expected of him, the more freedom he'd have. Sarah made a sound, not quite a laugh, more a release of breath. "That makes one of us, then." The youngest boy, James, had fallen into step beside Nako. He could feel the child's curiosity, like a tangible thing. "How do you know where you're going if you can't see?" James asked suddenly. "James, don't pester him," Sarah called from ahead. "I listen," Nako answered simply. "Feel sun, smell water, touch earth. But you might fall or bump into things," James persisted. Nako stopped and crouched down to the boy's level. "Give me your hand." Hesitantly, James placed his small hand in Nako's weathered palm. "Close eyes," Nako instructed. When he sensed the boy had complied, Nako placed his hand on the ground. "What do you feel?" "Dirt," James answered immediately. "More than dirt," Nako guided. "Rocky soil, slopes down. Water flows this way when rains come." He moved the boy's hand. "Feel difference?" "Sandy here, holds less water." "I never noticed that before," James admitted, sounding slightly awed. "Most people see with eyes only," Nako said. "Forget to see with hands, ears, nose." As they resumed walking, Nako felt a subtle shift in the family's energy. The youngest child now watched him with fascination, the middle boy with tentative respect. The oldest still radiated suspicion, and the mother Sarah her feelings were more complex. Hope tangled with doubt, desperation with determination. Nako had no illusions about his situation. He was still a captive, passed from one white owner to another. But as the miles passed beneath his feet, He found himself curious about this woman who'd spent her last coins on a blind Apache. Either very foolish or very wise, and he had yet to determine which. The Emerson homestead came into view as the sun dipped toward the western horizon. A small cabin with a sod roof, a lean-to barn, and a chicken coop barely larger than a doghouse. The land around it lay parched and barren, with withered corn stalks standing like accusing fingers pointing at the sky. To the east, a small garden. Plots showed signs of desperate tending, but the plants there drooped in surrender to the relentless drought. Nako could sense it all, the layout of the buildings from the echoes of their footsteps, the state of the crops from the brittle sounds they made in the slight breeze, the depth and direction of the well from the faint scent of moisture in the otherwise dry air. "It's not much," Sarah said, a defensive edge to her voice. "But it's ours. Pa built the cabin himself," William added proudly, "before he got sick." Nako nodded, acknowledging their words without comment. He'd never understood the white people's need to claim land, to mark boundaries on Earth that had no natural divisions. The Apache moved with the seasons, following, game and water, leaving each place as they found it so they could return again. "The barn's got a stall you can sleep in," Sarah said, leading him toward the smaller structure. "There's clean straw. I'll bring you some blankets." So he was to sleep with the animals. Nako wasn't surprised. To her credit, the woman sounded apologetic. "It's cooler than the cabin anyway," she added, as if to make the arrangement seem better. "We get terrible hot in there with just the one window." Emma had been unusually quiet since they'd arrived, but now she tugged at her mother's skirt. "Can't he stay in the house, Mama? What if there are coyotes?" Sarah hesitated. "The coyotes won't bother him, sweet pea. And we don't have room in the cabin." "He could have Pa's place," Emma suggested innocently. A tense silence followed, broken only by William's sharp intake of breath. "That's enough, Emma," Sarah said, her voice strained. "Mr. Nako will be fine in the barn. Now come help me with supper." Later, as darkness fell, Sarah brought Nako a thin blanket and a plate with a meager portion of beans, and what smelled like the last of some dried venison. He heard her hesitate at the barn door after setting down the items. "I'm sorry, it's not more," she said quietly. "We'll have a proper meal tomorrow after William checks the traps." Nako sat on the packed earth floor, cross-legged. "Why did you buy me?" A direct question seemed to catch her off guard. He heard her shift her weight, the soft rustle of her skirts. "I need help with the homestead," she finally answered. "My husband died last winter. We can't manage alone." "I cannot see to plow or plant," he pointed out. "No," she agreed, "but you have other skills, I think. You survived as a scout before." She trailed off, not naming his blindness. "Before white soldiers took my eyes," he finished for her. Another uncomfortable silence. "There are many kinds of blindness," Nako said eventually. "Some see only what they expect to see." "Is that supposed to be Apache wisdom?" There was a defensive edge to her voice again. "Just truth," he replied. "Good night, Sarah Emerson." He heard her soft footsteps retreating toward the cabin. In the morning, Nako woke before dawn, as had been his habit since childhood. He made his way carefully around the homestead, using his feet and hands to build a mental map of the place. The water pump near the garden, the privy behind the cabin, the chicken coop with its 3 remaining hens, the woodpile running low. Most concerning was the well. When he placed his hand on the pump handle, he could feel the strain in the metal, the resistance that spoke of a failing mechanism and a dropping water table. "What are you doing?" William's voice, suspicious and sharp. The boy had approached silently. He had that skill, at least. "Learning the land," Nako answered simply. "Stay away from our water," William said. "We barely have enough as it is." Nako turned toward the boy's voice. "Water growing scarce." Tell me something I don't know, William snapped. Pa dug that well himself. 15 feet down to hit water. Now the pump barely draws anything, and when it does, it's silty. Nako nodded thoughtfully. Pump broken. Water still there, deeper. And how would you know that? I know water, Nako said, was scout. Found water for my people in driest times, William scoffed. Right, and now you're blind, so that's real useful. Nako didn't respond to the taunt. Instead, he crouched down and placed his palm flat on the ground near the well. Land speaks, must listen. Ma! William shouted toward the cabin. He's doing something weird by the well. Sarah emerged from the cabin, Emma trailing behind her, clutching a rag doll made from scraps. What's going on? Sarah asked, approaching. Cautiously. He says he can find water, William reported. Says the pump is broken. It is broken, Sarah acknowledged. Your father meant to fix it before ... She didn't finish the sentence. How do you know about water, Nako? He stood slowly. Was my task for my people. Find water, game trails, safe paths. But now you can't see, William insisted. Eyes not only way to see, Nako replied. Emma had been watching the exchange with intense curiosity. Now she stepped forward, her small hand reaching out to touch Nako's arm. Can you teach me to find water? She asked before Nako could answer. Sarah interjected. Emma, leave Mr. Nako alone. He's not here to play games. Not games, Nako said softly. Important knowledge. Children learn quickest. Sarah made a non-committal sound. Well, right now we need breakfast, not water lessons. William, check the traps. James is already collecting eggs. Nako, there's wood needs splitting by the kitchen door. As the family dispersed to their tasks, Nako remained by the well. For a moment longer. He placed his hand once more on the dry ground, feeling the subtle vibrations beneath. There was water here, yes, but not where they were looking. The true source lay deeper, flowing beneath the ridge to the east. But that was knowledge to share when they were ready to hear it. For now, he would split wood and earn his keep, and watch as the tenuous trust between them either grew or withered like the crops in the field. 3 days passed in uneasy coexistence. Nako split wood, carried what little water the failing pump would yield, and sat silently during the family's increasingly sparse meals. The traps remained empty, the garden wilted further, and the strain showed on Sarah's face as she stretched their meager supplies to feed 5 mouths instead of 4. On the 4th morning, Nako found Emma watching him as he ran his hands along the ground near the eastern edge of the property. What are you doing? She asked, her voice bright with curiosity. Listening, he replied. To the dirt? Emma giggled. To the water beneath, Nako corrected gently. It speaks if you know how to listen. Emma knelt beside him, placing her small palm next to his larger one. I don't hear anything. Not with ears, he explained. With this. He tapped his palm against the ground. And this. He touched his forehead. Can you teach me? Emma asked, her voice solemn now. Nako nodded. First, must find right kind of wood. Special tree, that. Here's water too. What kind? In my language, we call it the water finder. Your people might say. Willow? Emma jumped up excitedly. There's a willow down by the dry creek. Pa showed me once. Can I show you? Nako smiled at her enthusiasm. Yes, lead the way. Emma took his hand naturally, without the hesitation adults often showed, and began guiding him across the property. This way. It's not far. Sarah was hanging laundry when they passed. Emma, where are you going with Mr. Nako? To the willow tree, Mama. He's going to teach me to find water. Sarah's voice held a note of skepticism. Is that so? Nako turned toward her voice. Old Apache way. Find water when wells fail. And how exactly does a blind man find water? The challenge in her tone was unmistakable. Same way blind fox finds rabbit, Nako replied, by knowing where to look. He heard Sarah's sigh, part exasperation, part desperate hope. Fine, but stay within shouting distance, Emma. The dry creek bed lay about 400 paces from the cabin. Nako could smell the difference in the soil as they approached richer, with traces of minerals deposited by past floods. The willow's location made sense. Its deep roots would reach underground water that surface plants couldn't access. Here it is, Emma announced. It's all droopy, but still alive. Nako ran his hands along the trunk, feeling the distinctive texture of willow bark. Good tree, strong roots. Knows where water hides. With careful movements, he selected a slender branch, and after muttering a quick prayer of thanks to the tree's spirit, broke it off. The wood was supple, still alive despite the drought. Now we make water finder, he explained to Emma. He bent the branch into a Y shape, the two prongs pointing outward. In your tongue, called divining rod. What does it do? Emma asked, watching intently. It pulls down when water below, Nako explained, demonstrating how to hold the two ends of the Y in each hand, with the stem pointing forward. Wood. Feels water's pull. Shows where to dig. Can I try? Emma asked eagerly. He handed her the forked branch. Hold tight but gentle. Let it move if it wants. Emma grasped the divining rod as instructed, her small hands wrapped around the two prongs. Now what? Walk slowly. Feel for pulling. They made their way back toward the homestead, Emma concentrating intensely on the willow branch in her hands. Nako walked beside her, one hand lightly on her shoulder, to guide his own steps. As they neared the ridge east of the cabin, the same ridge. Nako had sensed water beneath on his first day. He felt Emma suddenly stop. It's moving, she exclaimed. The stick is pulling down. Nako nodded, unsurprised. Water below, deep but strong. By now, their activity had drawn attention. James approached first, curious about his sister's excitement. What are you doing? He asked. Finding water. Emma said proudly. The stick shows where it is. That's just an old superstition. William's voice cut in as he joined them. Pa tried that once, said it was nonsense. Yet here the rod pulls, Nako observed mildly. Perhaps worth trying. Sarah had approached as well, the laundry forgotten. What exactly are you suggesting? Dig new well, Nako said simply. Here, not by cabin. Water flows deep beneath ridge. Dig a new well? Sarah's voice held disbelief. That's weeks of work. Work we don't have time for, with crops failing and food running short. Current well going dry, Nako reminded her. No water, no life. He could sense her weighing the options, her desperation battling with practicality. William, she finally said, fetch your father's pickaxe and shovel. We'll test this spot. Ma, you can't be serious, William protested, trusting a blind Indian with a stick over Pa's judgment about the well. Your father dug where made sense for the cabin, Sarah replied, her patience clearly wearing thin. But that doesn't mean it's the only water on our land. Right now, we need solutions, not arguments. Reluctantly, William went to retrieve the tools. James, sensing the importance of the moment, stood quietly beside his mother. If there's no water where you say, Sarah told Nako, her voice low so the children wouldn't hear, then you'll have proved yourself useless to us. I can't feed another. Mouth for nothing in return. Nako nodded, understanding the unspoken threat. Water is there. Must dig deep, but it flows strong. For all our sakes, I hope you're right, Sarah whispered. Emma still held the divining rod, its tip pointing insistently toward the ground. It's still pulling, Mama. The water wants us to find it. Despite everything, Sarah laughed softly at her daughter's characterization. Well then, we'd best not keep it waiting. Nako smiled slightly. The water was there. He knew it with the certainty that had once made him the most valued scout in his band. And when they found it, perhaps they would begin to truly see him, not as a burden, not as property, but as a man with wisdom worth heeding. 6 feet down, William's pickaxe struck rock. "That's it," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. Nothing but stone below. They'd been digging for 2 days, taking turns Sarah, William, and even James doing what they could, while Nako sat at the edge, listening to the changing sounds as they dug deeper into the earth. "Keep digging," Nako said calmly. "Water. Beneath stone. We can't dig through solid rock." William snapped, his frustration boiling over. "We've wasted 2 days on your Apache magic, and all we have is a hole." Sarah leaned on her shovel, exhaustion evident in her voice. "Maybe he's right, Nako. If there's nothing but bedrock below ... Not bedrock," Nako insisted. "Single stone. Water flows around." Emma, who had appointed herself Nako's helper, nodded vigorously. "The stick still pulls here. The water's waiting." Sarah sighed, torn between her children's conflicting views and her own dwindling hope. "1 more hour," she finally decided. "Then we give up and try to fix the old pump." Nako stood, removing his shirt despite the impropriety of doing so in front of a white woman. "I dig now." Without waiting for permission, he lowered himself into the hole, feeling the edges to orient himself. The earth here was different, cooler, with a mineral smell that told him they were close. He took the pickaxe from William's reluctant hands. "Stone has weakness," he explained. "Must find it." He ran his hands along the rocky surface, feeling for cracks or seams. Near the eastern edge, his sensitive fingers detected a slight depression. Positioning the pickaxe carefully, he struck with precision. A chunk of stone broke away. Encouraged, he struck again in the same spot. More stone gave way. After several more strikes, water began to seep through the widening gap. "Water!" Emma cried out in delight. Nako continued working, enlarging the opening. The trickle became a steady flow, pooling at the bottom of the hole. "I don't believe it," William murmured, his skepticism momentarily forgotten. Sarah's laugh held both. Relief and amazement. "You did it. You actually found water." By evening, they had broken through enough of the stone shelf to create a proper well. The water was clear and sweet, far better than the silty liquid their old pump had yielded in. "Its final days. We'll need to line the well and build a new pump," Sarah said as they sat around the table that night, celebrating with slightly more generous portions of bean stew. "But this changes everything. How did you know?" James asked Nako. "About the water under the rock?" Nako considered how to explain. "Water makes path through earth like ... like blood in body. I feel its movement. But we need to channel it to the garden somehow," Sarah mused. "It's too far to carry bucket by bucket." "Clay pipes," Nako suggested. "My people make from earth. Bake in fire. Water flows through. Clay pipes?" Sarah sounded dubious. "I've never heard of such a thing." "I show," Nako promised. "First, need special clay." Children helped find. The next morning, he took Emma and James to a small wash near where the dry creek bed curved around their property. Here, the soil was different, sticky when wet, rich, with minerals deposited over centuries of seasonal flooding. "This good clay," he explained, kneeling to dig his hands into the earth. "Gather much? Need big pile." The children set to work enthusiastically, using buckets to transport the clay back to the homestead. Even William joined in, his resistance softening in the face of Nako's proven success with the well. Under Nako's guidance, they mixed the clay with water and a small amount of sand, kneading it to the right consistency. Then he showed them how to form pipes by wrapping the clay around straight branches, leaving them to dry in the sun before carefully removing the wooden cores. Now need fire, he explained. Hot fire make clay strong. William, eager to contribute. His growing skills built a fire pit according to Nako's specifications. A circular trench with stones arranged to reflect heat inward, not just pipes, Nako said as they worked. Need vessel too. Big pot to hold water at garden edge. His hands moved deftly, shaping a large, round-bottomed pot with a wide mouth. Despite his blindness, his fingers worked with precision, guided by memory and touch. As he worked, he began to hum softly an Apache melody that made Emma smile, and tried to imitate the tune. "What are you singing?" she asked. "Water blessing," he replied. "Thank spirits for gift." Sarah, watching from nearby as she prepared a meal from their dwindling supplies, seemed torn between fascination and discomfort at this glimpse into pagan beliefs. "Does it matter?" she finally asked. "The songs and spirits and such. Does it affect the water?" Nako turned his face toward her voice. "Everything connected. Respect brings harmony. Harmony brings life." That evening, as the clay pieces dried in the waning sun, Sarah brought out her Bible. It was one of the few possessions she'd kept through all their hardships. "We have our own ways of giving thanks," she said, opening to Psalms. "He turns a desert into pools of water, a parched land into springs of water." Nako nodded, recognizing the peace offering for what it was. Different words, same truth. Later, as he shaped the final clay vessel, a wide basin that would serve as a reservoir at the garden's edge, he felt Emma's small hand on his arm. "Teach me to make one?" she asked. He guided her hands in forming. A small cup, her first attempt at pottery. As they worked, William approached, his footsteps hesitant. "The clay pipes look strong," he admitted grudgingly. "Do you think they'll really work?" "Yes," Nako said simply. "Water finds way, like hope." For the first time since his arrival, the boy's voice held no hostility when he replied, "I guess we'll see." The clay pipes worked. Water flowed from the new well to the garden, a small but steady stream that brought life back to the withered plants. Within a week, new green shoots appeared, and the previously drooping stalks straightened toward the sun. Sarah's face softened with cautious hope as she tended the reviving crops each morning. One evening, as the family finished their modest supper, Nako cocked his head toward the western sky. "Rain coming," he announced. Sarah glanced out the cabin's single window at the clear twilight sky. "There's not a cloud to be seen." "Tomorrow," Nako insisted. "Feel it in air." William, who had begrudgingly developed a measure of respect for Nako since the well discovery, looked skeptical, but refrained from outright dismissal. "If it does rain, it'll be the first in 3 months. Land thirsty," Nako agreed. "Need to call rain properly. Make welcome." "Call the rain?" James asked, intrigued. "How do you do that?" "With songs, with rhythms." Nako rose from his seat and walked outside, the family following with curious hesitation. In the yard, Nako knelt and began feeling the ground around him. He selected a flat stone about the size of a dinner plate, then another smaller, rounder stone. Sitting cross-legged, he placed the flat stone across his knees and began to tap the smaller stone against it, creating a resonant, hollow sound. "What's he doing?" William whispered to his mother. Sarah hushed him, her expression a mix of fascination and unease. "Let's see." Nako established a steady rhythm, then began to sing in his native tongue a low, melodic chant that rose and fell like wind across the desert. Though the words were incomprehensible to the Emersons, the sound itself seemed to carry meaning and ancient conversation between man and sky. Emma approached first, drawn by the hypnotic rhythm. Without prompting, she sat beside Nako, attempting. to clap along with his drumming. He nodded encouragement, subtly adjusting his tempo to match her small hands. "Rain song," he explained between verses, "tells clouds we honor their gift." James joined next, sitting on Nako's other side. "Can I try the drum?" Nako passed him the smaller stone. "Hit here," he guided, touching a spot on the flat stone that produced the clearest tone. Steady, like heartbeat. James tapped tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Nako resumed singing, his voice blending with the boy's drumming. Sarah remained standing, her arms crossed protectively across her chest. This wasn't the Christian worship she knew. It felt foreign, primitive even. Yet there was something undeniably beautiful in the simple ceremony, something that spoke to needs older than any formal religion. "Sarah," Nako called, surprising her with the direct address. "Rain needs woman's voice too, higher, like wind before storm." I don't know your songs," she stammered. "No words needed," he assured her. "Just voice. Heart knows song." William stood rigid beside his mother. "Ma, this is heathen nonsense." Sarah hesitated, torn between her son's concern and her own curiosity. "It's just singing, William. No different than hymns, in its way." "Hymns are God's music," William protested. "This is also prayer," Nako interjected calmly. "Different. Words, same meaning." Sarah surprised herself by sitting down near Emma, completing their small circle. After listening for a moment to catch the pattern, she began to hum softly, her clear voice weaving around Nako's deeper tones. Only William remained apart, watching with troubled eyes as his family participated in this unfamiliar ritual. Yet even he couldn't maintain his resistance when Emma looked up with shining eyes and patted the ground beside her. "Come on, Will," she pleaded. "It's fun." Reluctantly, he sat, though he made no move to join the music-making. They continued until dusk deepened into night, the rhythm evolving as each family member found their place in the impromptu orchestra. James, with his steady drumming, Emma's enthusiastic clapping, Sarah's gentle humming, and Nako's soulful chant binding it all together. When the song finally ended, they sat in silence, the echo of their music seeming to linger in the still air. Above them, stars emerged, in a clear sky that showed no hint of the promised rain. "Nothing's changed," William observed, unable to keep the "I told you so" from his voice. "Rain comes tomorrow," Nako repeated confidently. "Song travels far. Clouds will hear." As they prepared for bed that night, Sarah found herself humming snatches of the rain song as she tucked Emma under her thin blanket. "Mama," Emma whispered, sleepily, "I like Mr. Nako's songs." Sarah smoothed her daughter's hair. "They are pretty, aren't they? Do you think it will really rain tomorrow?" Sarah glanced toward the window, where stars still shone in a cloudless sky. "I don't know. Sweet pea. But wouldn't it be wonderful if it did?" In the barn, Nako sat with the drumming stone in his lap, continuing his prayers in private. He knew the signs, the subtle shift in air pressure, the distant scent of moisture, the way sound carried differently when rain approached. Clouds were gathering beyond the mountains, drawn by natural forces rather than human songs. Yet the singing mattered too, not because it created rain, but because it created connection to the earth, to each other, to something larger than their individual struggles. Tonight, for the first time, the Emerson family had briefly stepped into his world, hearing the rhythms his people had followed for generations. Just before dawn, the first drops fell tentative at first, then steadier, drumming on the cabin's sod roof like nature's own music. Sarah woke to the unfamiliar sound, momentarily disoriented until recognition dawned. Rain. After months of drought, blessed rain got in the main room. She found Emma already awake, standing by the window with wonder on her small face. "Mama," she whispered, the song worked. The rain lasted 2 days, gentle but persistent, soaking deep into the parched earth. When it finally ceased, the desert around the homestead seemed transformed. Subtle greens emerged from the brown landscape, and the air carried the sweet scent of wet sage and creosote. Nako sat outside the barn at dawn on the third day, his face lifted toward the eastern horizon. Sarah, rising early to check on the garden, paused when she saw him. "Good morning," she said, her voice gentler than it had been in the early days of his arrival. "Beautiful morning," Nako replied, sun making colors in sky. Sarah looked at the sunrise, a spectacular display of pink and gold streaking through scattered clouds. "Yes, it's lovely," she agreed, then realized the oddity of his observation. "Can you see it somehow?" "Remember colors," Nako explained. "Feel warmth changing as sun rises. Hear birds greeting day differently when sky is red." He turned, his face toward her. "What colors now?" The question caught her off guard. "Well, there's pink like wild roses but softer, and gold near where the sun is coming up. Higher up, the blue is pale, almost white." Nako nodded, a slight smile on his weathered face. "Good description. I see it here." He tapped his forehead. Something about his peaceful acceptance of blindness moved Sarah deeply. "I can't imagine losing my sight," she admitted. "Then not. Knowing what's around you, it must be terrifying." "Was at first," Nako acknowledged. "Now, see differently. Sometimes more than before." "How so?" "Eyes distract, show only surface. Without eyes, feel deeper truth." He stood, reaching for the cabin wall to orient himself. "Garden needs checking after rain." Sarah watched him navigate carefully across the yard, his movements becoming more confident as he learned the homestead's layout. An idea formed in her mind. That evening, after the children were asleep, Sarah took a piece of wood from the pile William had cut and began whittling it with her husband's old pocket knife. She worked by lamplight, shaping the sturdy branch with careful strokes. When Nako emerged from the barn the next morning, Sarah was waiting for him. "I made something for you," she said, feeling unaccountably shy. "It's not much, but ... She pressed a smooth wooden staff into his hands. Nako ran his fingers along the walking stick, feeling the polished surface and the simple handle she'd carved at the top. "Good work," he said appreciatively. "Strong wood. I thought it might help you get around more easily," Sarah explained. "It's Mesquite Thomas always said it was the toughest wood in Arizona." "Thank you," Nako said, testing the stick's height against his own. It was perfectly sized, reaching just below his shoulder. "Will be useful." Later that day, Sarah found herself describing the revived garden to Nako as they walked its rows together. "The beans are standing straight now, and the corn looks like it might actually produce something. Even the squash vines are putting out new leaves." "Good soil here," Nako noted, crouching to feel the earth between the rows. "Just needed water." "We've tried for 3 years to make things grow," Sarah admitted. "Thomas was so sure we could. Farm here, but every season brought another disappointment." "Desert farming different," Nako explained. "Not like Eastlands. Need special ways." Using his new walking stick for balance, he demonstrated how to create shallow depressions around each plant. Rain catches here, stays longer. As they worked, side by side, Sarah found herself sharing stories of Thomas, his dreams for the homestead, his stubborn determination, his gentle way with the children. Speaking of him to Nako somehow felt different than the few awkward conversations she'd had with neighbors after his death. There was no pity in Nako's listening, just quiet acceptance. "You loved him much," Nako observed when she fell silent. "Yes," Sarah said simply. "He was a good man. Hard-headed sometimes, but good." After a moment, she added, "What about you? Did you have a family?" "Before." Nako was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Had wife, Son, cavalry raid took them 3 winters ago. Same time took my eyes. The stark tragedy of his words left Sarah speechless. Her own loss felt suddenly less isolating, knowing he too carried such grief. I'm sorry, she eventually managed. Nako nodded acknowledgement. Life continues. Must find new path. The simple philosophy struck Sarah as both profound and practical, exactly like the man himself. Their conversation was interrupted by William's arrival, his footsteps quick with excitement. Ma, I found fresh deer tracks by the wash. With the new growth after the rain, they're coming closer to water. Good ears? Nako commented with approval. Heard you from far. William, still adjusting to the idea of Nako's heightened senses, looked momentarily disconcerted. You heard me coming? Footsteps tell much. Excited walk, good news. William hesitated, then made a decision. The tracks are fresh, but I'm not sure which way they went. Pa was teaching me tracking, but ... I help, Nako offered. Not with eyes, but can teach you signs. William glanced at his mother, seeking permission. Sarah nodded encouragement. I suppose you can't make me a worse hunter than I already am. William conceded with grudging humor. That afternoon, Sarah watched from the cabin door as Nako and William prepared for hunting. Nako demonstrated how to feel a track's depth and determine its age, how to identify bent grass showing direction, how to test for scent by touching the ground, then bringing fingers close to the nose. We become each other's eyes, Nako explained to William. You see track, tell me. I, no meaning, tell you. For the first time since Thomas's death, Sarah saw genuine enthusiasm in her eldest son's face. The boy who'd been forced too quickly into manhood now looked his age again, eager to learn new skills. As they departed, Nako with his walking stick and William with his father's old rifle, Sarah felt a peculiar mixture of emotions, hope for a successful hunt that would feed them, pride in her son's growing capabilities, and something less definable regarding the Apache man who was slowly, steadily becoming more than just a purchased servant. The hunting expedition was successful beyond expectation. William returned proudly carrying a young buck across his shoulders, Nako walking beside him with the walking stick tapping a steady rhythm on the ground. Ma, look what we got. William called, his voice bright with achievement. Sarah rushed from the garden where she'd been working, her hands dirty and her face flushed. Oh my goodness. You actually did it. Nako showed me how to track it, William explained, carefully lowering his burden to the ground. He could tell where it was heading just by feeling the tracks and listening to the birds. William has good eyes, steady hands, Nako added, made clean shot. The venison transformed their meals. After months of near starvation, the family ate properly for the first time since Thomas's death. Sarah carefully preserved most of the meat, smoking it as Nako instructed to make it last longer than their usual salting method. Over the following weeks, the homestead underwent a subtle transformation. The garden flourished with the steady water supply from the new well. The clay irrigation system expanded under Nako's guidance, with channels reaching farther into the previously barren fields. Seeds that Sarah had been saving for the next planting season were sown early to take advantage of the rain-softened soil. Emma and James took to following Nako everywhere, learning Apache words for plants and animals, helping him identify useful herbs that grew in the washes. Even William, though still maintaining a measure of caution, sought Nako's advice on hunting and tracking. Sarah found herself smiling more, laughing even. The desperate edge that had driven her to the auction had softened, replaced by cautious optimism. At night, she recorded their progress in the family Bible, noting each small victory in the margins. Beside the Psalms. It was during one such evening of relative contentment that they heard horses approaching. Sarah tensed immediately. Visitors. were rare and not always welcome in this remote area. Soldiers, Nako said quietly from his place near the hearth, where he'd been showing James how to make a small clay ocarina. 4 horses. Sarah moved to the window, confirming his assessment with surprise. A cavalry patrol was indeed approaching a lieutenant and 3 enlisted men, dust-covered from the trail. "William, take Nako to the barn," she instructed quickly. "Stay with him?" William nodded understanding, leading Nako out the back door as Sarah smoothed her hair and went to meet the soldiers. "Mrs. Emerson?" The lieutenant dismounted, removing his hat. "Lieutenant Hayes, Fort Bowie. We're patrolling for hostiles in the area." "Hostiles?" Sarah kept her voice steady. "We haven't seen anyone troublesome. There have been reports of renegade. Apaches from the San Carlos Reservation," Hayes explained. "Small band, but dangerous, led by a chief called Broken Hand." From her peripheral vision, Sarah saw William and Nako slip into the barn. She gestured toward the water barrel. "You're welcome to water your horses, Lieutenant. It's been quiet here." Hayes nodded thanks, then surveyed the homestead with evident surprise. "Your place is looking prosperous, ma'am. Last time the patrol came through, it seemed—" He paused. "Diplomatically, we were struggling," Sarah acknowledged. "But we've had some good fortune lately. Found a new water source." "Glad to hear it." The lieutenant's gaze drifted toward the flourishing garden and the clay pipes running alongside it. "Interesting irrigation system you've got there. Don't think I've seen anything quite like it. My husband designed it before he passed," Sarah lied smoothly. "We've only recently managed to implement it." Hayes nodded, but his expression had grown more calculating. "Those look like Indian methods, Mrs. Emerson. Apache, specifically." Sarah's heart quickened. "Is that so? I wouldn't know about such things. Mind if we look around a bit? Standard procedure." Before Sarah could object, the lieutenant was already striding toward the barn, his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. Sarah hurried after him, mind racing. "Lieutenant, is that really necessary? Or just a family trying to survive out here?" Hayes ignored her protest, pushing open the barn door. Inside, William stood beside their elderly mule, brushing it with exaggerated attention. There was no sign of Nako. "Just checking for signs of Apache activity, son," Hayes explained. "Seen anything unusual lately?" "No, sir," William answered, his voice admirably steady. "Just us here." The lieutenant circled the small barn, checking the stalls and hayloft. Finding nothing, he stepped back outside, his suspicion seemingly undiminished. "You've made remarkable improvements for a woman alone with children," he observed. "New well, irrigation, thriving crops. It's almost miraculous." "God provides," Sarah said simply. "Indeed." Hayes reached into his saddlebag and withdrew an official-looking document, which he handed to Sarah. "This is notice of increased patrols in the area. Any sign of Apache activity is to be reported immediately to Fort Bowie." Sarah took the paper, noting the Army seal. "Of course, Lieutenant. I should mention," Hayes added casually, "that harboring hostiles is a federal offense, even domesticated ones." Their eyes met, and Sarah knew he suspected something. "I'm aware of the law, Lieutenant." Hayes mounted his horse. "We'll be through again next week. Good day, Mrs. Emerson." Only after the patrol had disappeared into the distance did Sarah release her breath. "William, where is he?" William emerged from the barn, grinning despite the tension. "Under the floorboards. Pa built a storage cellar for keeping vegetables." "Cool." Nako figured they'd searched the barn, so he hid there. Moments later, Nako himself appeared, dusty but unharmed. "Soldiers looking for my people," he said, his expression grave. "Yes," Sarah confirmed, handing in the notice. Do you know this Broken Hand they mentioned?" "My cousin," Nako said simply. "Great warrior." would not leave reservation without reason. The implications hung heavy in the air between them. If Nako's kin were in the area, his presence on their homestead put them all at risk. The lieutenant asked. Sarah looked down at the official notice in her hands, the weight of their situation suddenly pressing down anew. They were finally thriving, finally finding hope, and now this threat emerged. We'll be more careful, she decided. The root cellar was clever. We can improve the hiding place. Nako shook his head. Maybe I should go. Bring danger to you. No, Sarah said, surprising herself with her vehemence. You've brought nothing but good to this family. We'll face whatever comes together. A conviction in her voice seemed to settle the matter temporarily. But as Sarah tucked the cavalry officer's letter into her Bible that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that their fragile peace was balanced on the edge of a knife. Emma's fever began without warning. One evening she was playing contentedly with clay figures Nako had taught her to make. By midnight, she burned with a heat that frightened Sarah to her core. It's so sudden, Sarah whispered, wringing out another cool cloth to place on her daughter's forehead. She was fine at supper. Nako stood in the doorway of the small bedroom, his head tilted as he listened to Emma's labored breathing. Desert fever, he said, comes quick, like snake. Sarah had seen desert fever before a vicious illness that had taken 3 children. In the nearest settlement last summer, a memory of those small coffins sent a chill through her despite the warm night. We need the doctor from Tucson, William said, already reaching for his coat. Too far, Nako countered. 12 hours there and back. Fever works faster. We can't just do nothing. William's voice cracked with fear for his sister. Not nothing, Nako said. Have medicine. Need certain plants. Sarah looked up from Emma's flushed face. Apache medicine? Nako nodded. Strong medicine. For bad fever. The choice lay before her trust in distant white doctors or the Apache knowledge at hand. Emma moaned, turning restlessly on her small pallet, her nightdress soaked with sweat. What do you need? Sarah asked, decision made. James knows plants now, Nako said. He can find with lantern. William help him. The boys departed into the darkness with a hastily scrawled list of herbs, creosote bush resin, prickly pear pad, certain roots Nako had shown James during their explorations. While they were gone, Nako knelt beside Emma's bed, gently feeling her pulse and the heat of her skin. Strong girl, he murmured. Fighter. Will your medicine really help? Sarah couldn't keep the desperation from her voice. Yes, Nako said simply. My son had same fever once. Same medicine saved him. It was the first time he'd spoken directly of his lost child. Sarah reached across Emma's small form and briefly touched Nako's hand in acknowledgement of shared parental fear. When the boys returned with the gathered plants, Nako worked quickly, his fingers certain despite his blindness. He crushed leaves, extracted resins, and mixed preparations with water from the new well. Living water, he called it, not dead water from pump. The resulting brew smelled bitter and earthy. Emma, half conscious, turned her face away when Sarah tried to administer it. Must drink, Nako insisted. Tell her story while she drinks. Distract mind. Sarah began recounting Emma's favorite tale about a clever rabbit, spooning the medicine between her daughter's reluctant lips during pauses in the narrative. When the cup was empty, Nako applied a poultice of crushed plants to Emma's chest and feet. Now we wait, he said. Sing to her. Songs help medicine work. Through the night, they took turns at Emma's bedside. Sarah sang hymns from her childhood. William recited poems he'd learned in school. And James kept time on the small drumming stone Nako had given him. Nako himself hummed Apache healing songs, his deep voice blending strangely but beautifully with Sarah's clearer tones. Near dawn, Emma's fever broke. Her breathing eased, and her skin cooled to the touch. She fell into a natural sleep, her small face peaceful for the first time in hours. Sarah wept with relief, her hand clutching Nako's arm. "Thank you," she whispered fervently. "Thank you." The crisis forged something new between them, a trust deeper than mere cooperation. In the days that followed, as Emma regained her strength, Sarah found herself asking Nako about other Apache remedies and practices. One afternoon, as they sat in the shade of the cabin while Emma napped inside, Sarah showed Nako a quilt she was piecing together from fabric scraps. "I've been saving every bit of usable cloth," she explained, guiding his hands to feel the different textures. "It's not much, but it will help when winter comes." Nako ran his sensitive fingers over the patchwork. "Good work. But gaps between. Pieces let cold through?" "I know," Sarah sighed. "I don't have enough fabric to make it properly." "Other materials can fill spaces," Nako suggested. "Rabbit fur, woven yucca, soft inner bark." The idea intrigued Sarah. That evening, she experimented with incorporating strips of yucca fiber between fabric pieces, using techniques Nako described from Apache blanket making. The result was sturdier than her original design, with the natural fibers adding both warmth and an unexpectedly attractive texture. When Emma was well enough to sit outside, she watched Sarah's work with fascination. "It's pretty, Mama. Different from Mrs. Peterson's quilts?" "It's a new way," Sarah explained. "A combination of our traditional quilting and Apache weaving that Nako taught me." "Like us," Emma observed with childish directness. "We're combined now too, aren't we? Apache and settler together." Sarah glanced toward where Nako sat with the boys, teaching them to make hunting calls using hollow reeds. "Yes," she agreed softly. "I suppose we are." The quilt became a family project. William reluctantly at first, then with growing interest, helped collect yucca and process it into usable fibers. James discovered that certain desert plant dyes could color the natural materials, adding bands of yellow, red, and purple to the design. Even Nasho contributed, showing Sarah how to incorporate small shells and stones as decorative elements that also added weight and warmth to the blanket. As the quilt grew, so did their shared language, a mixture of English, Apache words, and signs they developed among themselves. Emma could now communicate simple concepts in Nako's native tongue, while he had become fluent in their family expressions and references. One evening, as they gathered for supper, Sarah made a decision that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. Instead of having Nako eat separately, or after the family as he had initially, she set a place for him at the table between James and Emma. "Join us properly," she invited. "You're part of this household now, not a servant." William looked up sharply, but after a moment's consideration, nodded his agreement. "You saved Emma," he acknowledged. "That makes you family in my book." As they shared the meal venison stew with vegetables from their now thriving garden, Sarah felt a sense of rightness that transcended her lingering cultural hesitations. Like the two-material quilt taking shape under her hands, they were creating something new together, neither fully Apache nor fully white settler, but a blending. That was proving stronger than either tradition alone. It happened so naturally that Sarah almost didn't notice the shift. Nako had been chopping wood, his movements efficient despite his blindness. He'd learned the feel of the axe, the sound of properly split logs. As he worked, he'd struck his hand on a protruding nail from the woodpile frame. Sarah, hearing his quiet exclamation of pain, had hurried over with water and a clean cloth. The cut wasn't deep, but bled freely. Without thinking, she'd taken his hand in hers to examine the wound. "It needs cleaning," she said, gently dabbing at the blood. "Hold still." Only as she worked did she become aware of the intimacy of the moment. Her fingers wrapped around his weathered palm, the unexpected softness of his skin beneath the calluses. Their heads bent close together, her breath mingling with his in the cool autumn air. Nako remained perfectly still, but she could feel a tension in him that hadn't been there before. When she finished bandaging his hand with a strip of clean linen, he didn't immediately pull away. "Thank you," he said, his voice lower than usual. Sarah stepped back, suddenly flustered. "It's nothing, just a small cut." That night, as she prepared for bed, Sarah found herself thinking of Thomas. They'd been married 12 years before typhoid took him, years of hard work, shared dreams, and the blessed chaos of raising children. He'd been a good husband, steady and kind. From the small wooden box where she kept her few treasures, Sarah removed Thomas's daguerreotype. His solemn face stared back at her, forever frozen in the formal pose the photographer had required. She tried to summon the familiar ache of loss, the longing for his presence that had been her constant companion for months after his passing. Instead, she found a gentler feeling, fond remembrance, without the sharp edge of grief. When had that changed? The realization troubled her. Was it disloyal to feel her heart stirring toward another man so soon? Yet it had been nearly a year now since they'd laid Thomas to rest behind the cabin. A year of struggle and desperation that had only turned toward hope when Nako had entered their lives. Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on her bedroom door. William stood there, his young face serious in the lamplight. "Ma, can I talk to you?" She patted the bed beside her. "Of course. What is it?" William sat, his hands twisting nervously in his lap. "It's about Nako." Sarah felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "What about him?" "I've been watching you," her son said bluntly. "The way you look at him, the way you talk to him now." William, pause. "Only been gone a year," he continued, his voice catching. "Are you ... Do you have feelings for Nako?" The directness of the question left Sarah momentarily speechless. Her first instinct was to deny it, to protect her son from a truth she'd barely acknowledged to herself. But William deserved honesty. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "I care for him, yes. He saved this family in more ways than one. But ... But he's Apache," William finished for her, "and blind." "That's not," Sarah began, then stopped herself. "Yes, there are complications. Many of them. But those aren't the main reasons for my hesitation." "What is then?" Sarah looked down at the daguerreotype still in her hand. "Your father was the only man I ever loved. I'm not sure I know how to open my heart that way again." William was quiet for a long moment. "Pa would want you to be happy," he finally said. "He always said that's all he wanted for any of us." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. When had her son become so wise? "It's not that simple, William. Nothing ever is," he replied with a shrug that was simultaneously childlike and oddly mature. "But the way I see it, we'd all be dead or gone from here if not for Nako. And he's alone too. Lost his family same as we lost Pa." After William left, Sarah sat for a long time with Thomas's image. "What would you tell me to do?" she whispered to the silent photograph. Of course, there was no answer. But as she returned the daguerreotype to its box, her wedding ring removed. Months ago, when she'd sold its match, caught her eye. The plain gold band had been too small to fetch much at the general store, so she'd kept it as a remembrance. Sarah slipped it onto her finger, where it had rested for 12 years of marriage. It felt different, now a memento rather than a binding promise. With a quiet decisiveness, she removed it again and placed it in the box alongside the photograph. The next morning, Sarah found Nako sitting on the porch, his fingers working deftly on a small carving. As she approached, she could see it was taking the shape of a bird, a delicate hummingbird with outstretched wings. "That's beautiful," she said, sitting beside him. "For Emma," he explained. "Birthday soon, yes?" Sarah smiled. "Yes, next week. She'll be 5. How did you know? She tells me every day how many sleeps until her birthday. There was warm amusement in his voice. They sat in companionable silence as Nako's knife made tiny, precise cuts in the wood. His injured hand seemed to cause him no difficulty. "How is your cut?" Sarah asked. "Healing." He paused in his work. "You have gentle hands." The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. "I noticed you're good with your hands, too," she said, then immediately blushed at how the words sounded. Nako's lips curved in a slight smile. "Different ways of seeing," he said. "Hands see shape, texture. Ears see movement, distance. Nose sees what I might miss." "And what do you see now?" Sarah asked softly. He turned toward her, his blind eyes somehow finding her face unerringly. "See woman whose heart begins to heal, like land after drought." The perception in his words startled her. "How could you know that?" Voice changes, step lighter, laugh comes easier. He hesitated, then added, "No ring sound when you move hand." Sarah glanced down at her bare finger, surprised that he'd noticed such a detail. "I put it away last night," she admitted. "It felt like time." Nako nodded understanding. "Time changes all things. River never same water twice." The wisdom in his simple statement resonated with her. She'd never be the same woman who had married Thomas, just as Nako would never be the same man who had lost his wife and son. They were both transformed by loss, by struggle, and perhaps now by the tentative hope growing between them. The changing weather came suddenly, as it often did in the territory. Warm autumn days gave way to chill winds sweeping down from the northern mountains. The family had prepared well. The garden's harvest dried and stored, meat smoked, firewood stacked high against the cabin wall. For the first time since Thomas's death, Sarah faced winter without dread. One morning, Nako paused while helping James repair a chicken coop. His head tilted, listening to something beyond ordinary hearing. "What is it?" James asked, noticing his stillness. "Someone coming?" Nako said quietly. "Not friendly steps." Sarah, hanging washing nearby, glanced toward the road. "I don't see anyone." "Not road," Nako clarified. "West side, by creek." William grabbed his father's rifle from inside the cabin and stood ready, his young face serious. "No," Nako cautioned. "Not Apache. White man. Smells of whiskey." Minutes later, Jeb Carson emerged from the brush along the dry creek bed. His presence on their property was unexpected. His own homestead lay 5 miles south, and he rarely visited. A barrel-chested man with a perpetual scowl, Carson had been one of the first settlers in the area. He'd made no secret of his belief that Sarah should sell out and leave after Thomas died. "Mornin', Widow Emerson," Carson called, his tone falsely jovial. He swayed slightly as he walked, confirming Nako's assessment about the whiskey. "Mr. Carson," Sarah acknowledged coolly. "What brings you to our property?" Carson's gaze swept over the flourishing homestead, the expanded garden, a new well, the repaired outbuildings. His expression soured. "Came to see how you're faring. Heard some interesting talk in town." "We're doing well, as you can see," Sarah replied. "Thank you for your concern." Carson's attention fixed on Nako, who had positioned himself subtly between the visitor and the children. "So it's true. You got yourself an Indian." "Mr. Nako works with us," Sarah said carefully. "He's been a great help." Carson spat on the ground. "Dangerous game you're playing, woman. Those Apache devils have been raiding again. Killed the Petersons last week, burned their place to the ground." Sarah paled. "The Petersons? All of them?" "Every last one," Carson confirmed with grim satisfaction at delivering the shocking news. "Army's on the warpath now. Shoot on-site orders for any Apache off the reservation." Sarah glanced at Nako, whose face remained impassive despite the threat implied in Carson's words. Mr. Nako is under my protection, she said firmly. He's done nothing wrong. Carson laughed harshly. Protection? A woman and 3 youngsters? His eyes narrowed. Way I see it, he's probably sending signals to his murdering kin, telling them which homesteads to hit next. That's a lie, William interjected, stepping forward with the rifle still in his hands. Nako's part of our family now. Family? Carson's face contorted with disgust. Ain't natural, boy. Your pa would turn in his grave. Sarah moved to stand beside her son. I think you should leave, Mr. Carson. Now. Instead of retreating, Carson walked toward their irrigation system, eyeing the clay pipes with contempt. Indian contraption, he muttered. With sudden violence, he stomped on one of the pipes, shattering it. Water immediately began to pool around the broken section. Stop that! James shouted, rushing forward. Carson shoved the boy roughly aside. This is white man's territory. We didn't fight the Apache for 20 years to start living like them. Before anyone could react further, Nako was beside Carson, his movements so swift the older man had no time to defend himself. Though blind, Natsio gripped Carson's wrist with precise accuracy, applying pressure that made the settler gasp in pain. You leave now, Nako said, his voice deadly quiet. No harm, children. Carson wrenched free, stumbling backward. You'll regret this, he snarled, rubbing his wrist. All of you. He backed away, pointing at Sarah. Associating with Indians, letting him put hands on a white man. There are laws against this kind of thing, Widow Emerson. After Carson disappeared back toward his property, Sarah hurried to inspect the damaged irrigation pipe. We can repair, she said, more to calm the children than from certainty. Yes, Nako agreed, already kneeling to examine the break. Need new clay section. That evening, after the children were asleep, Sarah and Nako sat on the porch, speaking in low voices. Was Carson telling the truth about the Petersons? Sarah asked. Could your people have done that? Nako was silent for a long moment. Some Apache very angry. Reservation life is slow death. Bad food, disease, no freedom. But ... double quotes, he shook his head. My cousin not kill families. Warriors, soldiers, yes, not children. Carson will spread word about you in town, Sarah worried. He might bring others back. Yes, Nako agreed. Has much anger, fear too. The next day, William rode to town for supplies, returning with grim news. Carson's in the saloon, talking. To anyone who'll listen. Saying we're harboring a hostile. That Maz, he hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. That you and Nako are ... improper. Sarah's cheeks flushed with anger and embarrassment. That's ridiculous. That's not all, William continued. He's convinced some men to come handle the Indian problem, as he puts it. I heard them planning to ride out tomorrow night. That evening, as they discussed their options, a discovery heightened their alarm. During his evening perimeter check-a-habit Nako had maintained since the cavalry's visit, he found a fence post deliberately broken on their western boundary. Not broken by animal or weather, he reported, bringing a splintered section. Back to show Sarah. Cut with saw, then pushed over. Someone marking path through our land. Carson, Sarah said grimly. He's showing his friends the best approach. She looked at the broken wood in Nako's hands, a chill running through her that had nothing to do with the autumn air. How many men did you hear them planning to bring, William? 6, maybe 7, her son answered, all armed. Sarah took a deep breath, making a difficult decision. Nako, perhaps you should go. Hide in the hills until this passes. We can say you left. Nako shook his head firmly. Would not leave you to face angry men alone. He placed the broken fence post beside the door, his expression resolute. This my home now, too. We'll defend it. The simple declaration, this my home now, too, brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. Impulsively, she reached for his hand, twining her fingers through his. "We'll face this together then," she said. "All of us." They prepared through the night and following day. Sarah sent Emma and James to a cave near the spring that Nakao had discovered, a small, hidden place with a narrow entrance easily defended. She packed them food, water, and blankets, instructing them to remain until someone came with the family's secret password. "Like an adventure," she told Emma, forcing brightness into her voice. "You and James will be explorers discovering a new world." William refused to join his siblings in hiding. "I'm staying," he insisted, his young face set in determination that reminded Sarah painfully of his father. "I can shoot as well as any man in the territory." Sarah didn't argue. At 14, William was still a boy in many ways, but frontier life had forced early maturity upon him. Besides, they needed every defender they could muster. Under Nako's guidance, they prepared the homestead. They moved water barrels inside in case of fire. They blocked most windows with furniture, leaving strategic gaps for observation and defense. At the blind Apache's suggestion, they scattered pots, tools, and other noisy items around the perimeter as makeshift alarms. "Sound tells location," Nako explained. "We'll know where they are even in darkness." As the sun began to set, Sarah took Thomas's rifle from its place above the mantel. She'd kept it cleaned and oiled as he taught her, though she'd fired it only a handful of times since his death. The weight of it felt strange in her hands, both familiar and terrible. "Do you know how to use it?" Nako asked, sensing her hesitation. "Yes," Sarah answered. "Thomas made sure I could protect the children, if needed." She checked the loading mechanism, the familiar clicks and the smell of gun oil bringing back memories of Thomas standing behind her, guiding her hands through the motions. "I pray we won't need to fire a shot," she added quietly. "These are our neighbors, misguided as they may be." Nashu's expression was grave. Men with fear and whiskey not think clearly. "Be ready." They heard the riders approaching just after dusk, the distinctive sound of horses moving slowly, deliberately, trying for stealth but betrayed by bridle jingles and occasional murmured instructions. 7 men, Nako whispered, his head tilted in that characteristic listening pose. Carson leading, coming from west side as expected. Sarah positioned herself on the porch, rifle held ready but pointed downward. William stood inside the partially open door, his father's old shotgun in his hands. Nako remained invisible. In the shadows beside the cabin, a strategy they'd agreed upon, Carson and his men would focus on the visible threats first. The riders emerged from the tree line, silhouetted against the darkening sky. They halted at the edge of the cleared area around the cabin. Carson's voice carried clearly in the evening air. "Widow Emerson, send out the Apache and no one gets hurt." Sarah stepped forward, keeping the rifle pointed down but visible. "Mr. Carson, you and your men are trespassing. I must ask you to leave our property immediately." A ripple of uneasy murmurs ran through the mounted men. Clearly, some hadn't expected armed resistance from a woman. "Don't be a fool, Sarah," Carson called, using her first name with deliberate familiarity. "We know what's been going on here. Harboring a hostile, letting him corrupt your children with heathen ways. It ain't right." "Mr. Nako has brought nothing but good to this family," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "He's under my protection and is welcome in our home." Carson spat on the ground. "Under your protection or in your bed?" Several of the men laughed, a mean sound that made Sarah's cheeks burn with anger and shame. "That's enough, Carson," one of the other riders said, sounding uncomfortable. "We came to deal with an Indian problem, not insult a respectable widow." "You call her respectable?" Carson retorted. "Living with a savage, teaching her children Indian ways?" Thomas Emerson would rise from his grave if he knew. Sarah raised the rifle then, pointing it directly at Carson. You will not speak of my husband or my family again. Leave now. All of you. Carson's face darkened with rage. Put that gun down, woman. This is men's business. This is my land, Sarah countered. My home, my family. Carson turned to his companions. See? She's gone native. Probably bewitched by that Apache devil. He urged his horse forward. We're taking him, Sarah, one way or another. Stand aside. Sarah's finger tensed on the trigger. Not another step, Jeb. For a tense moment, it seemed Carson might charge forward, despite the threat. Then another. Voice called out from the darkness. She not alone. Nako stepped into view, empty-handed but emanating a quiet danger that made several horses shift nervously. There he is, Carson shouted, reaching for his own gun. Sarah fired a warning shot that kicked up dirt just in front of Carson's horse. The animal reared in panic, nearly unseating its rider. The next one won't miss, Sarah warned, working the lever to chamber. Another round with practiced movements. Carson regained control of his mount, his face contorted with fury. You'd shoot white men to protect an Indian? I'd protect any innocent person from a lynch mob, Sarah replied steadily. From inside the cabin, William emerged fully, shotgun raised. You'd better listen to my ma, he called. She means what she says. The standoff stretched, tension crackling in the air. Some of Carson's men were already backing their horses away, their enthusiasm for the confrontation clearly waning. This ain't over, Carson snarled. Not by a long shot. That Indian's days are numbered. Perhaps, Nako spoke calmly. All days numbered for all men. Question is how we live them. The simple philosophy seemed to unnerve Carson more than any threat might have. He yanked his horse's head around. You'll regret this, Widow Emerson. The cavalry will hear about your arrangement. Tell them what you like, Sarah replied. We have nothing to hide. As the riders retreated into the darkness, Sarah kept the rifle ready until the sounds of hooves faded completely. Only then did she lower the weapon, her hands shaking with delayed reaction. They'll be back, William said, his young voice solemn. Yes. Nako agreed. Carson has hate in his heart. Will not stop. Sarah looked at the loaded rifle in her hands, the weapon that had been Thomas's, now used to defend a future he could never have imagined. She wondered if William was right. Would Thomas understand? Or would he, like Carson, be horrified by the changes in their lives? What now? William asked, breaking into her thoughts. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. Now we prepare for what comes next. They'll return with more men, or worse, they'll bring the cavalry. Darkness settled fully over the homestead, but no one slept. Sarah and William took turns watching from the windows while Nako circled the property at regular intervals, his acute hearing serving as their early warning system. They're still out there, he reported after his third circuit. 3 men, watching from the ridge. Sarah nodded grimly. Waiting for us to lower our guard. Or for reinforcements, William added, peering into the darkness. As midnight approached, Nako returned from another scouting loop, his expression grave. More riders coming. From east now, many horses. Sarah's heart sank. The cavalry? No. Nako shook his head. Different sound. Carson's friends from other homesteads, I think. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. 3 men they might have held off, but a larger force would eventually overcome them, especially if they were willing to burn the cabin. We need a new plan, Sarah decided. We can't stay here. William looked shocked. Leave the homestead? After all we've done to save it? Just temporarily, Sarah clarified. Until this anger burns itself out, or we can appeal to proper authorities in Tucson. Carson will destroy everything, William protested. The garden, the irrigation system, all our work. Things can be rebuilt, Sarah said firmly. Lives cannot. Nako had been listening silently to their exchange. Now he spoke. No safe path, through Osh behind ridge, leads to mountains. The cave where Emma and James are hiding? Sarah asked. Beyond that, Nako explained, Apache land. Old camps where my people lived before reservation. William tensed. But you said there were renegade Apache in the area. Your cousin's band. Yes, Nako acknowledged. But better chance with them than Carson's men. The weight of the decision pressed on Sarah. Flee into Apache territory, where cavalry patrols shot on sight? Or stay and face a lynch mob whose anger had been brewing for weeks? We need to collect Emma and James first, she said, making her choice. What should we bring? Only what needed for survival, Nako advised. Travel light, move fast. They worked quickly, gathering essential supplies. Dried meat, beans, matches, the medical kit Thomas had always maintained, a small cooking pot, and a water skin. Sarah wrapped their Bible in a piece of the two-material quilt, unable to leave, behind either the family record or the symbol of their new unity. How will we find our way in the dark? William asked as they prepared to slip out the back of the cabin. In response, Nako reached into his shirt and withdrew a small, flat piece of tanned hide. In the dim lamplight, Sarah could see it was covered with intricate patterns, dots, and lines, interconnected in a complex design. Star map, Nako explained, shows path through mountains, used by Apache scouts for generations. William leaned closer, fascinated despite their dire circumstances. But how can you use it? You can't see the stars. No need see with eyes. Nako said, no stars here. He tapped his forehead. Feel their positions. Map reminds hand where to point. He demonstrated, holding the hide map in one hand while pointing up and slightly eastward with the other. There is talking God's star, leads to morning. Sarah marveled at yet another way Nako had adapted to his blindness. Even the night sky, which seemed the most visual of navigational tools, he had found ways to interpret through memory and touch. We'll follow your lead, she said, trusting him completely now. They extinguished all lights in the cabin to maintain the illusion of their presence, then slipped out through the root cellar that had once hidden Nako from the cavalry patrol. A narrow tunnel, originally dug by Thomas for vegetable storage, extended beyond the cellar and emerged in a dense patch of mesquite 20 yards behind the cabin. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing in breathtaking profusion across the dark sky. Nako moved with confidence, guiding them through the brush using his walking stick to detect obstacles. Sarah followed closely, with William bringing up the rear, shotgun still at the ready. They had covered perhaps half a mile when they heard shouts from the direction of the homestead. An orange glow bloomed against the night sky. They're burning the cabin, William whispered, his voice tight with anguish. Sarah's heart twisted at the thought of their home Thomas's careful craftsmanship, the children's few toys, the bed where she'd birthed Emma, consumed by flames born of hatred. But she forced herself to keep moving. Buildings could be replaced. Lives could not. They reached the dry wash that ran behind the eastern ridge, following its winding course deeper into the wilderness. Nako moved with increasing assurance as they entered territory he had once known intimately as a scout. Cave soon, he murmured. Children safe there. The reunion with Emma and James was emotional, but necessarily brief. Emma clung to Sarah, her small face streaked with tears of relief, while James peppered William with anxious questions about what had happened. We must keep moving, Nako urged. Carson's men will search when they find cabin empty. Where are we going, Mama? Emma asked as Sarah helped her bundle up against the night chill. On an adventure, Sarah replied, summoning a reassuring smile. Nako is taking us to a special place in the mountains. Apache place? Emma asked, unexpectedly perceptive. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Yes, where his people used to live. Will they be there? James asked, excitement mixing with apprehension in his voice. We don't know, Sarah answered honestly. But Nako will keep us safe. As they prepared to leave the cave, Nako took out the star map again, running his fingers over its surface. Path follows water spirit, he explained, tracing a line. That presumably represented a seasonal waterway. Leads to Hidden Valley. Good place for camp. William studied the map with growing interest. These marks show mountains? Yes, Nako nodded. Each pattern tells story. Mountain with 2 peaks. Ridge like sleeping warrior. Valley where eagles nest. The boy's expression shifted from skepticism to respect. So you navigate by stories, not just landmarks. All land has stories, Nako replied. Apache remember them in songs, in maps, in names we give places. As they set out again, Sarah found herself watching the interaction between her son and Nako with a sense of wonder. Even in this moment of crisis, learning was taking place, understanding deepening. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when they reached the mouth of a narrow canyon. Nako halted, his head tilted in that characteristic listening pose. What is it? Sarah whispered, immediately alert for danger. People ahead, he replied softly. Apache. Sarah's grip tightened on Emma's hand. Your cousin's band? Yes, Nako confirmed. Smell their cook fires. Hear morning songs. The family exchanged anxious glances. They had fled one danger, only to walk directly into another. One potentially even more deadly. Sarah gathered her children close, instinctively placing herself between them and the unseen Apache camp. What do we do now? She whispered to Nako. I speak to them, he replied calmly. Stay here until I call. No, Sarah grasped his arm. It's too dangerous. What if they don't recognize you? They will know me, Nako assured her. Even blind, I am still Nako. Before she could protest further, he was moving forward with confident steps, using his walking stick to navigate the rocky ground. Sarah watched with her heart in her throat as his figure grew smaller against the pre-dawn sky. Ma, what if they kill him? William asked, voicing the fear they all shared. They won't, Sarah said with more conviction than she felt. He's one of them. But we're not, William pointed out grimly. They waited in tense silence, the minutes stretching unbearably. Emma clung to Sarah's skirt, unusually quiet, while James fidgeted nervously beside William. Finally, a figure appeared on the path. Nako returning, accompanied by another Apache man. The stranger was older, with long gray-streaked hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades under the harsh desert sun. It is safe, Nako called to them. Come forward. Sarah hesitated only briefly before leading her children toward the 2 men. As they approached, she saw the older Apache studying them with undisguised curiosity. This is Undone, Nako introduced, elder of my cousin's band. He speaks some English. The old man nodded gravely. Nako tells strange story. White woman buys him at auction, makes him family. His dark eyes scrutinized Sarah. Is true? Yes, Sarah confirmed, meeting his gaze steadily. Mr. Nako has become dear to us. He saved my family from starvation and taught us to live better. On our land, Nanton's expression remained impassive. Now white men hunt you because of him? They burned our home, William interjected, his young voice tight with emotion. Just because we treated Nako like a person instead of a slave. Something flickered in the old man's eyes, a brief softening. Come, he said finally. Council. We'll decide what to do with you. They followed Nanton into the hidden valley where the Apache band had made their camp. It was a small group, perhaps 20 people in total, mostly women, children, and older men. Only a handful of warriors were visible, their expressions wary as the white family entered their sanctuary. The camp was arranged in a rough circle of brush shelters, with a central fire pit where several women were preparing the morning meal. Children stopped their play to stare openly at the newcomers, especially at Emma's blonde hair, which seemed to fascinate them. Nako was greeted with obvious recognition by several of the older members of the band. They touched his shoulders, spoke rapid words in Apache that Sarah couldn't understand but recognized as expressions of surprise and joy at finding him alive. "They thought me dead," Nako explained to Sarah. "Or prisoner still." "You were both," she said softly. The tribal council gathered quickly, 5 men, including Nantan, seated in a semicircle around a small ceremonial fire. Nako joined them, sitting slightly apart to indicate his intermediate status between the Apache and the white family. Sarah and her children were directed to sit opposite the council. The rest of the band gathered at a respectful distance to observe the proceedings. Nantan produced a long, intricately carved pipe from a decorated leather pouch. He packed it with a mixture of tobacco and herbs, lit it from the fire, and drew deeply before passing it to the next elder. "Peace pipe," Nako explained quietly to Sarah. "Shows council is fair, open to all voices." The ceremony proceeded with deliberate dignity, each elder taking a ceremonial puff before the pipe finally returned to Nantan. Only then did the discussion begin, rapid exchanges in Apache that left Sarah feeling increasingly anxious. "What are they saying?" she whispered to Nako. "They debate your fate," he replied honestly. "Some say no white person can be trusted. Others say children should not suffer for adults' actions. And you? What are you telling them?" "Truth," Nako said simply, "about hunger that made you buy me. About learning to see each other beyond blindness mine of eyes, yours of heart." The debate continued, occasionally becoming heated. One younger warrior seemed particularly opposed to the white family's presence, gesturing emphatically in their direction as he spoke. "That is Taza, son of Broken Hand," Nako explained. "My cousin is away hunting. Taza speaks for him. Says white people bring only death to Apache." "He's not wrong," Sarah admitted quietly. "The government's treatment of your people has been shameful." Nako looked surprised at her acknowledgement. "You understand this?" "I've seen enough to understand at least a little," she replied. "Living with you has opened my eyes to many things." Their conversation was interrupted when Nantan addressed them directly. "Woman," he called in accented English, "speak to council. Why should Apache help white family?" Sarah rose slowly, conscious of all eyes upon her. She had never imagined addressing a tribal council, had no preparation for such a moment. But the truth was all she had to offer. "I can't speak for all white people," she began, "only for myself. And my family. We treated Nako badly at first as property, not a person. But he showed us nothing but wisdom and kindness in return. He taught us to find water, to grow food in the desert, to heal sickness. My children learned your songs and stories." "I learned—" She paused, gathering courage. "I learned that the differences between us matter less than what we share." Nantan translated her words, his own expression unreadable. When he finished, an elderly woman spoke up from behind the council, her voice strong despite her advanced age. "She says you have Apache eyes now," Nako translated. "See beyond surface." The council fell into discussion again. Eventually, Nantan spoke directly to Nako at length. Whatever he said caused Nako to straighten with evident surprise. "What is it?" Sarah asked when there was a pause. "Council offers shelter," Nako explained, his voice reflecting his own amazement, "until safe to return to your land or continue to Tucson." "They're helping us?" William asked incredulously. "With conditions," Nako cautioned. "You must respect Apache ways while here. Children must help with camp tasks, And double quotes, he hesitated. And what? Sarah prompted. And they wish to know if bond between us is true, Nako finished, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. If you would make me truly family in white man's way, as I am already in Apache way. Sarah's cheeks warmed as she realized what he meant. They're asking if we plan to marry? Yes, Nako confirmed quietly. Nantan says no white woman ever took Apache husband willingly. Would be powerful medicine, powerful symbol. Before Sarah could respond, Emma piped up with childish directness. Mama loves Nako, and we do too. He should be our new pa. The simple declaration caused murmurs among the Apache, and even a few small smiles. From child's mouth, truth comes easiest. Nantan observed, reaching for the peace pipe once more. Council will continue to discuss. Until then, you may stay. 3 days passed in the Apache camp, days of careful integration and cautious acceptance. Emma and James adapted quickly, playing with the Apache children and picking up words and phrases with the natural linguistic facility of the young. William proved valuable in hunting expeditions, his skills with the rifle complementing the Apache warriors' expertise with bow and spear. Sarah found herself drawn into the daily rhythms of the women's work grinding mesquite beans into flour, weaving baskets, preparing meals. Despite the language barrier, she discovered a universal language of shared labor and mutual respect. On the 4th morning, Broken Hand returned from his hunting expedition. Taller than Nako, but with the same proud bearing, he embraced his blind cousin with evident emotion, speaking rapid Apache that required no translation to understand relief, joy, brotherhood. When Nako explained the situation with the white family, Broken Hand's expression grew serious. He studied Sarah and her children for a long moment before speaking. My cousin says you see with heart, not just eyes, he said in surprisingly good English. Few white people learn this skill. Nako taught us, Sarah replied simply. Broken Hand nodded. He was always wisest among us. He turned to Nantan, speaking in Apache once more. The old man responded, gesturing toward the valley entrance where lookouts kept watch. Scout reports your enemies have left Homestead, Broken Hand translated. Searched mountains 2 days, then returned to town. Now is time to reclaim what is yours. Sarah exchanged glances with Nako. We can go home? Not same home, Nako cautioned. Cabin burned. But land remains. Broken Hand conferred briefly with his warriors and made an unexpected offer. We will help you rebuild. Show Carson and others that Apache and white woman stand together. It was a bold proposal, fraught with risk for both sides. The renegade band was already hunted by the cavalry. Openly assisting a white settler family would draw even more attention. For Sarah, associating publicly with hostile Apaches could bring legal consequences beyond Carson's vigilante justice. Yet the symbolism was powerful, precisely the kind of bridge building that might, in time, help heal the divisions between their peoples. Yes, Sarah decided. We would be honored by your help. The journey back to the homestead was made with careful precautions. Apache scouts ranged ahead and to either side, watching for cavalry patrols or settlers lying in wait. They traveled at night when possible, resting in hidden draws during daylight hours. When they finally crested the ridge overlooking the Emerson property, the devastation was immediately apparent. The cabin was a blackened skeleton, its log walls partially collapsed. The chicken coop and storage shed were completely destroyed. Only the barn remained standing, though its door hung askew on broken hinges. Oh, Mama, Emma whispered, her small hand tightening in Sarah's. Our home. Sarah knelt beside her daughter. The house is gone, sweet pea, but not our home. Home is the land, the water, the growing things. And most importantly, home is us, all of us together. They descended cautiously, alert for any sign of Carson or his men. The homestead appeared deserted, but Broken Hand insisted on a thorough scouting of the surrounding area before allowing the family to approach. "Clear," he reported eventually. "They have gone." As they walked the property, Sarah cataloged the damage with a pragmatic eye. The cabin was beyond repair and would need to be rebuilt from the foundation up. The garden had been trampled, crops uprooted or broken. Most painful was the deliberate destruction of the irrigation system clay pipes smashed. Channels filled in. Even the new well partially collapsed. Yet amid the devastation, there were small mercies. Their root cellar remained intact, its entrance hidden by the cabin's collapsed floor. Inside, they found preserved food and some household items Sarah had stored there before their flight. The orchard of young fruit trees now Saw had helped plant was damaged but not destroyed. Many saplings bent, but not broken. Most striking was the burned crop field, the larger planting area, beyond the garden where they had sown wheat and corn. Carson and his men had set it ablaze, leaving a charred expanse of blackened earth. Nako knelt at the edge of the burned field, running soil through his fingers. "Not destroyed," he said confidently. "Fire releases seed. New growth comes stronger." "Broken." Hand nodded agreement. "Fire is old way to prepare fields. Apache and other tribes burn land to bring renewal." Sarah stared at the blackened earth, trying to see it through their eyes, not as destruction, but as transformation, potential rather than loss. That afternoon, the work of reclamation began. Broken Hand's warriors helped clear debris from the cabin site while the women established a temporary camp near the barn. William and James worked alongside Nako to assess the well damage, determining it could be repaired with relatively little effort. Most powerful was the ceremony. Broken Hand suggested at sunset a blessing of the burned field. The Apache gathered in a circle around the charred earth, with Sarah's family integrated among them. Drums were produced, and a rhythmic beating began as Nantan scattered a mixture of seeds and blessed herbs across the blackened soil. "Fire cleanses," Broken Hand explained to Sarah as they watched. "What grows next will be stronger, pure." As if to confirm his words, when Sarah looked closely at the field's edge, she could already see tiny green shoots emerging from the ash wild. Seeds activated by the fire's heat, beginning the process of renewal. That night, as they gathered around a cook fire outside the damaged barn, Nako sat beside Sarah, their shoulders touching lightly. "Carson thought to destroy us," he observed, quietly. Instead, he brought Apache and white family together in a way not seen before. Sarah nodded, watching as Emma learned a string game from an Apache girl, while James practiced fire-making techniques under Nantan's patient guidance. Even William had found common ground with Taza, the young warrior who had initially opposed. Their presence, the two comparing notes on tracking techniques. "From the ashes," Sarah murmured, "something new grows." She slipped her hand into Nako's, no longer concerned who might see. The question the tribal council had raised about the nature of their relationship seemed to be answering itself with each passing day. Word spread quickly through the territory. Impossible rumors that Sarah Emerson was rebuilding her homestead, with the help of hostile Apaches. Carson had told everyone the widow and her children had either fled or been killed. The discovery that not only were they alive, but working alongside Broken Hand's band created a sensation that drew curious onlookers from miles around. The first visitors approached cautiously, rifles at the ready. They found an unexpected scene. Apache warriors and William Emerson raising new cabin walls together. Sarah and the band's women replanting the garden side by side. Children of both cultures playing in easy camaraderie. Most turned away, unsettled by the unnatural alliance. But a few those whose desperation mirrored what Sarah's had once been stayed to watch, and eventually to ask questions. "How did you get those irrigation pipes to work?" asked Samuel Wright, whose own crops had failed 3 seasons running. Never seen anything like them. Apache design, Sarah answered honestly. Nako taught us. The clay holds water better than metal in this heat. Wright frowned, clearly conflicted. Indians taught you farming? Seems backward. They've lived in this desert for thousands of years, Sarah pointed out. We've been here less than 50. Who do you think might know it better? That simple logic proved persuasive to those whose survival instincts outweighed their prejudices. Within weeks, a small but growing number of settlers began visiting regularly, observing the Apache techniques for water conservation, desert planting, and food preservation. Broken Hand's band maintained a cautious presence. Warriors melted into the hills when strangers approached, but returned to continue their work once Sarah signaled it was safe. Gradually, as certain settlers became familiar faces, the Apache remained visible, allowing careful interaction. The new cabin rose quickly, built stronger than the original. Nako suggested modifications to the design: thicker walls for better insulation, strategically placed windows to capture breeze but minimize heat, a cooking ramada outside to keep the interior cooler in summer. Most remarkable was the transformation of the burned field. As Nako had predicted, new growth emerged from the ashes with astonishing vigor. The first wheat shoots appeared green and strong, thriving in soil enriched by ash. When Sarah expressed amazement at the rapid recovery, Nanten nodded sagely. Land remembers how to heal, the old man said, like people, if given chance. The cavalry inevitably came to investigate the rumors. Lieutenant Hayes arrived with a full patrol, clearly expecting trouble. Instead, he found Sarah calmly tending her garden. No Apache in sight. Mrs. Emerson, Hayes greeted her stiffly. We received reports of Apache activity on your property. Did you indeed? Sarah replied mildly. And who might have reported that? Several. Concerned citizens, Hayes said evasively. Is it true you've had contact with Broken Hand's renegades? Sarah straightened, meeting his gaze directly. I've had help rebuilding after Jeb Carson and his friends burned my home and destroyed my crops. I didn't ask for papers from those who offered assistance. Hayes frowned at the mention of Carson. We heard your property was destroyed by Apache raiders. Then you heard wrong, Lieutenant. I have witnesses who saw Carson lead armed men to my homestead. They set fire to my cabin with the clear intent to drive me out or worse. The officer's expression shifted slightly. That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Emerson. It's the truth, Sarah stated firmly. Just as it's true that my family has learned valuable farming techniques from the Apache. Techniques that could benefit every struggling homestead in this territory. If people could set aside their hatred long enough to learn. Hayes surveyed the property, the half-built cabin, the thriving garden, the promising field. You've accomplished a great deal for a woman alone with children. I'm not alone, Sarah replied. I have neighbors who help both white and Apache. The lieutenant's eyes narrowed at her open admission. You realize association with hostiles is against territorial law? I associate with people who treat my family with kindness and respect, Sarah countered. The law should concern itself more with men who burn homes than with those who help rebuild them. After the patrol departed, Nako emerged from his hiding place in the root cellar. Dangerous words, he observed. Could bring trouble? Silence brings worse trouble, Sarah replied. It's time for truth to be spoken. That evening, as they sat around the cooking fire, Broken Hand made an unexpected announcement. His band had received word through tribal networks that the government was offering new terms to Apaches willing to return to the reservation better rations, more freedom of movement, less interference from Indian agents. My people talk of accepting, he told Sarah and Nako, not because we trust white government, but because children need stability, elders need rest. Will you go? Sarah asked, unable to hide her concern for what it might mean for Nako. Broken Hand nodded slowly. Soon. But first, we finish what we started here. True to his word, the Apache chief stayed until the new cabin was completed and the irrigation system fully restored. On the day of their planned departure, Sarah insisted on a farewell celebration, a shared meal bringing together the Apache band and those settlers who had come to value their knowledge. Under Nako's guidance, they constructed a long table in the yard from planks and sawhorses, covering it with Sarah's quilts. The women of both groups prepared food Apache dishes of mesquite bread and venison, alongside settler contributions of cornbread and preserved fruits. The gathering was small, but significant. The Wright family, elderly Mrs. Peterson, who had lost her prejudice after the Apache helped repair her roof, the young Baker couple whose sickly baby had thrived on an Apache herbal remedy. They sat together with Broken Hand's people in uneasy but genuine fellowship. Midway through the meal, the unexpected happened. Reverend Collins, the territory's circuit-riding minister, rode into the yard. Sarah tensed, expecting condemnation of their unconventional gathering. Instead, after a moment's visible shock, the minister dismounted. "I heard rumors," he said, approaching the table. "Had to see for myself." "Join us, Reverend," Sarah invited, though uncertainty colored her voice. "There's plenty." Collins stood silently, observing the mixed company breaking bread together. His gaze lingered on the children Apache and white, playing together without constraint, then moved to Nako, sitting at Sarah's side. "In 20 years in this territory," he finally said, "I never thought to see such a sight." He paused, then added quietly, "Perhaps I've been preaching the wrong sermon." He took the offered seat between Nanton and Samuel Wright. As the meal continued, Sarah observed the minister deep in conversation with Broken Hand, the two leaders finding common ground despite vastly different worldviews. The shared harvest table became more than a farewell gesture. It became a symbol of possibility, a glimpse of what the territory might become if understanding replaced fear, if cooperation replaced conquest. 1 year later, the Emerson homestead had become unrecognizable from the failing property Sarah had once struggled to maintain alone. The new cabin stood strong and weathertight, its design a practical blend of settler tradition and Apache wisdom. Around it, gardens flourished in carefully planned beds that maximized the desert's scarce water. Fruit trees, now growing vigorously, promised their first small harvest in the coming fall. Most remarkable was the addition that had been built onto the eastern side of the cabin, a trading post where settlers and Apache from the reservation could exchange goods and knowledge in neutral territory. The territorial governor, after much debate, had officially recognized the outpost as a sanctioned meeting ground, exempt from restrictions that normally prevented Apache from leaving reservation boundaries. The wedding had taken place 6 months earlier, with Reverend Collins presiding over a ceremony that incorporated elements from both cultures. Sarah had worn a dress adorned with Apache beadwork created by the women of Broken Hand's band. Nako had stood proud in a white man's suit jacket over traditional Apache leggings. His unseeing eyes bright with joy got William had given his mother away. His initial reservations long since transformed into genuine respect for his new stepfather. Emma had scattered wildflower petals along the path, singing a mixture of Apache melody and Christian hymn that symbolized the union better than any formal ritual could have. Now, on a warm spring morning, Sarah sat on the porch of their home, cradling her newborn son in her arms. The baby's copper skin was slightly lighter than his father's, his dark eyes shaped like Sarah's. In his features, both bloodlines were visible, a living embodiment of the bridge they had built between worlds. "He's awake," Nako observed from beside her, his acute hearing picking up the subtle change in the infant's breathing. Sarah smiled. "Yes, hungry again, I think." Nako reached out, his sensitive fingers gently tracing the baby's face. Strong spirit, like his mother, and stubborn like his father, Sarah teased, leaning against Nako's shoulder. They had named the child Thomas Nilchi Emerson, honoring both Sarah's first husband and Nako's father. Wind that brings change. Nako had translated the Apache name, a fitting description for a child whose very existence challenged the territory's rigid boundaries. In the yard, Emma was teaching a group of children, both settler and Apache, rain songs Nako had shared with their family that first summer. Her facility with both languages had made her an unofficial interpreter when trading parties visited, her natural diplomacy smoothing potential conflicts. James, now 8, had developed an encyclopedic knowledge of desert plants and their uses, combining the written learning of settler schools with the practical wisdom of Apache elders. Already, settlers from as far as Tucson sought his advice on which native plants might supplement their traditional crops. William, approaching 16, had just returned from the ridge where he'd been checking their expanded irrigation system with Taza, who now served as a liaison between the reservation and the trading post. The two young men had formed an unlikely friendship, bound by their shared protective instinct toward their respective communities. "Carson's place is empty," William reported as he joined his parents on the porch. "Herd in town he's pulling. Up stakes, heading to California." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Carson's influence had waned as the success of the Emerson approach became evident. When his accusations against Sarah had been investigated and found false, his standing in the community had collapsed entirely. "Good riddance," William muttered. "No," Nako corrected gently. "Wish him better heart in new place. Hate only brings more hate." William sighed but nodded acceptance of the wisdom. "Broken hands coming tomorrow with the trading party," he said, changing the subject. "Says he has news from the Indian Bureau." Sarah exchanged a hopeful glance with Nako. They had been petitioning for months to have the trading post officially recognized as a model for future Apache settler relations. The baby fussed in Sarah's arms, and she rocked him gently. "Your uncle brings news," she murmured to the infant. "Perhaps good changes for your future." As if understanding her words, the child settled, tiny fingers curling around one of Nako's offered digits. The simple gesture, the newest life on the homestead, connecting its two most unlikely partners, moved Sarah deeply. 3 years ago, she had stood trembling at an auction block, spending her last coins on a blind Apache man because she saw no other hope for her starving family. She could never have imagined then where that desperate act would lead, not just to survival, but to a new kind of family, a new vision of community. Emma's clear voice rose from the yard, leading the children, in a song that blended words from both cultures into a new harmony. From the trading post, the sound of Jane's explaining plant properties to a visiting settler family carried on the breeze. William and Taza had moved to the barn, deep in discussion about expanding the irrigation system to serve neighboring properties. "We'll carry this forward," Nako observed, as if reading Sarah's thoughts. "Long after us, they will remember and teach others." Sarah looked down at their son, the physical embodiment of their unlikely union. In his peaceful face, she saw the future not easy, certainly not without challenges, but full of possibilities that had seemed unimaginable before. "From desperation to hope," she murmured. "From hunger to abundance. From blindness to seeing with heart," Nako added. Squeezing her hand beyond the homestead, the desert stretched in all directions, harsh and beautiful. But here, in this small oasis they had created together, a new way of living had taken root, one that honored the wisdom of both peoples, that found strength in difference rather than fear. The baby yawned, his tiny features relaxing into sleep once more. Sarah smiled, seeing in him the legacy that would outlast them all, not just buildings or land or possessions, but a compassion that transcended boundaries, a vision of harmony in a fractured world.